So back when I first started playing guitar, one of my favorite things to do was jamming with other guitar players. Obviously, it just felt so new. They'd start with this 12-bar riff, and I'd go straight into one of the 2 or 3 SRV rip-off licks that I actually knew, and we would just have a good time. The only problem was I didn't have a lot of people in my immediate circle that I could really do that with. I had musician friends, some of them even really talented, but I just wanted so badly a group of consistent people that I could just sit down with and really enjoy the blues. And fortunately for me, around my junior year of college, I think I found that. You see, I had started hanging out with these 2 guys at my college who both came from the same frat. I had seen one of them play a Tommy Emmanuel song at a coffee house, so I thought these guys must know what they're doing and they must be the type of guys who would be fun to jam with, right? So we start jamming on a semi-regular basis whenever we have time, but very rarely is it all 3 of us together. One day I was really excited because we were finally all 3 of us able to get together and we were gonna have the blues jam that I had always dreamed about. Just one tiny little problem. You see, my amp was kind of busted. You see, I'd saved up all summer to buy this Fender Super Champ X2, the first tube amp that I had ever owned, and I was so excited whenever I got to play it anywhere on campus, no matter the setting. And I can't remember exactly what was wrong with it. It was probably something very simple, but something I definitely couldn't get on short notice, being on a campus where the nearest guitar store was probably about an hour away with no traffic. But even with that, I was not gonna let that stop me from jamming with my friends. So what we decided to do was to go to our school's music building to see if there were any amps just lying around. You see, even though I didn't go to a music school, we were around a lot of musicians, and at times people would literally just leave amps lying around. And even though I probably wouldn't do this now, sometimes you could just plug in and there would be a pretty nice amp right there. So we head over, my friends with their amps in hands, and once we enter the building and start looking around, we come upon this Fender amp, and it looks kind of big. Now you'd think I'd be pretty excited since I had been using Fender amps, but in reality, I was kind of the complete opposite of that. See, the amp in front of me was a Fender Champion 100, an amp that had been out for a couple of years that probably sounded fine, especially for just like a small jam with some friends, but I was adamant in my head that all non-tube amps were a big old piece of trash. And I thought that's what all guitar players thought, like these amps are for beginners and people who don't know what they're doing. So I dragged this thing back over to my friends and I'm already complaining like this is the only thing they had over there. It probably sounds so bad. My expectations for this thing were so low, but maybe, just maybe, it could prove me wrong. So I plugged it in and just hope for the best. So as we start playing, it gets to my turn to solo, and as I start digging into the strings and hearing those first few notes, all of the confirmation bias seems to hit all at once, and I realized I don't necessarily like what I'm hearing, and I'm doing everything that I can to fix it, at least everything that I knew how to do at the time. I'm messing with the EQ section, I'm messing with the gain, but nothing seems to be working. And not only that, but on top of my very terrible tone, I'm playing with 2 guitar players who are very clearly years ahead of me, and in the moment, I'm gonna be honest, I felt pretty uncomfortable. I didn't really know how to handle myself, and in my insecurity, I decided to do the only thing that I thought could ever make this moment any better. I decided to blame the gear. And I start talking complete smack. This thing is garbage. Everything would be so much better. This would all be fixed if my tube amp was just here. This word hadn't been invented yet, but in today's world, what we'd call this is a mild crash out. And that would instantly become one of the most embarrassing moments of my early guitar playing journey, not just because over the years I would come to find some solid state amps that I really connected with, some so much so that I would think they would have been probably better for me than the X2 at the time, but also because every time I would think back to that jam, like really think back to it, not just about my tonal situation, but about the other guys that I was playing with, I would start to have this sort of epiphany. Both of these guys were actually playing solid state amps. One of them was playing a Vox Valvetronics, an amp that I had actually owned before, and the other was playing this small orange amp. And as you could tell when I say orange, I don't necessarily mean the color. I'm talking about the brand, a brand that up until about 2 years ago when I first tried the OR30, I had never actually given the time of day to. And even though this amp had been so different than everything that I had been used to playing at the time, this one-channel hard rock amp with pictures over the knobs instead of text, I ended up really liking it and thinking to myself, you know, maybe one day I will try one of these other orange amps, maybe a Micro Terror or one of the Rock Verbs, but that's when it instantly hit me. And I remembered the one orange amp that I knew probably deserved a second chance. So this came in a couple days ago, and I'm really excited because this is the Orange Super Crush 100. It's part of their Crush series, the same one that my buddy was playing all those years ago back at our jam in college, but this one in particular is just a little bit different. This guy has 2 channels, all analog with a digital reverb, which I had trouble identifying because sometimes I still have problems remembering what the pictures actually mean on the Orange amp, outside of like bass and treble and mids, which is just one tiny pet peeve. My biggest pet peeve with the amp as a whole is I didn't expect just how heavy this thing was, coming in at 40 pounds, which I thought the point of not getting a tube amp, or at least one of the bigger points, was mobility and the fact that you didn't have to carry around something super heavy. But I think the thing which sparks an even bigger question, because I saw online people nonstop raving about this thing, specifically the non-combo version, even with the weight, does the tone and everything about this big chunk of amp make it worth it? Well, it was time I found out. So straight from the jump, the thing that kept sticking out to me when I was first plugging in was just how different this thing actually was from that OR30. Like we were saying before, that's a 1-channel rock amp. So even simple things like the process of getting a clean tone were completely different. And that's with me plugging straight in, no pedals, just kind of trying to figure out the clean channel and everything associated with all the parts that the OR30 didn't have, the most notable of which being the reverb. Now, the reverb on this was a lot more sensitive than I ever could have imagined, and I think a lot of that was due to the way that I saw that other amp. Thinking that because most of the guys that I usually associated with amps like these are like the hard rock guys and Marcus King. So going in, I really did expect the reverb to be pretty tame, but even when I was on the clean channel, I found myself having to back off little by little and being pretty surprised. Not saying it got ambient to the levels of a plate or a Hall, but it was way closer to what I expected usually from Fender style amps and their reverb than I originally anticipated. Especially when using the dirty channel, that's where I really had to do my due diligence in backing it off and finding exactly where I like it. But let's talk about that dirty channel for a second, because that is where things got a little more interesting. So once I'd gotten past the world of the cleans, I knew there were 2 separate pathways I could potentially take with this. I could go straight to the dirty channel, or I could crank the gain on the clean with something like a more transparent overdrive to really see what this could do and simultaneously see how it could take pedals. And that, in a lot of ways, I was way more excited about. So I plugged in a chat breaker with a gain at about 50%, probably about 12 o'clock, and I was completely stunned with just how much headroom this thing actually had. Obviously, I didn't expect heavy metal levels of distortion with a blues breaker circuit, but in a lot of ways, I kind of just used it as a boost, which outside of just the regular clean tone that I was experiencing for the first time, was probably my favorite tone that I got out of the amp. It completely enhanced my enjoyment of the clean thing, but I knew at one point I was gonna have to go dirty. So when I first plugged this thing into the dirty channel, what I realized was I low-key hated it. It sounded really thin, which I knew from experience both using my own Orange amp and from doing research that that's not necessarily supposed to be the case. But that's when I realized, again, just how different this thing is, because on the clean channel, you just have the master output and you have your gain knob, because I had to remind myself that unlike the clean channel, you now have a gain, a volume, and a master knob to take into consideration. And that's the point where it did take some finicking with, but once I got it, it was like, okay, game over. it's to say that pretty much every single time when I start to really ruminate on all of the competitors and the quote-unquote solutions when it comes to tube amps, I'm always thinking of digital. I'm thinking of the Quad Cortex, and when it comes to the combo amps, I'm thinking of things like the Katanas. But there really is a realm for things like this, and even in the much higher end with things like the JC120, for those all analog solid state amps, and some of them have really great reputations that really live up to them. Am I saying that this thing is better than the OR30? Probably not, seeing as that is almost 3 times the price of this. But I think the biggest compliment I can give to this specific version of the Crush series is that there probably are amps in that price range, tube amps, that I think some of these could probably give a big run for their money, especially if someone wants to get into the orange sound, which is something that guitar players like me who come from the world of only using like the 3 big brands, or at least the way I originally did, is probably worth at least a try. But again, I don't think it matters at all what I try. What matters is what you do. So please let me know, have you ever tried playing an orange Crush amp? Have you owned one? Do you like orange amps? Do you not? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I would say something like I've wanted to check out the Crush amps for a while, but this was actually a very new venture. It's not something that I expected a month ago, but it was a very pleasant surprise, especially seeing and being able to think back to the situation with my friend who I loved his tone so much and I loved his playing, seeing what he liked so much about it. But if you want to know anything more about the Orange Crush, nay, the Super Crush, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel, if that's something you want to do. Or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this videos, the pedals, the amps, even the cameras, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to all of my patrons. There's some extra exclusive content on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic night.